and being a grifter is far more profitable.
We're facing activists that have infiltrated this industry, and they continue to push these false narratives and signal boost these false stories.
Mainstream Republicans, mainstream conservatives, whatever you want to call it, maybe stop consistently bashing video game culture. That's a popular thing to do.
A lot of conservatives tend to disrespect gaming and gaming culture, and I don't think that's helpful.
A lot of you have been messaging me to cover anti-SJWs again, specifically about the G4 TV stuff. Now, I haven't really been keeping up on that drama, so sorry for those who asked. I'm not actually going to cover that stuff. But something I'm disappointed no one showed me is that the Daily Wire, you know, that outlet owned by Ben Shapiro, actually collaborated with Geeks and Gamers, namely Ryan Kinnell and Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, and had them on to sort of spread their culture war in video games and movies to the Daily Wire audience. So I thought it'd be fun today is to go through that video, and we're going to talk about the points raised, and you guys can probably guess what we're going to talk about. These people fully have not moved on from like the first Trump administration or something like that. Like stuff they're talking about, like ANITA SARKEESIAN, The Last Jedi, The Last of Us Part 2, they're never going to get over these things, are they? And of course, the people who complain about the woke left politicizing everything, politicizing everyone's escape in gaming from the real world, they sure do love to throw their own politics into everything and actually politicize everything while actually ignoring very, very political stuff they actually like, while they get outraged about the really, really like centrist politics of the sequel films that are pretty non-existent. They claim to love the new Dune film, which is very, very political, very critical of settler colonialism, was influenced by all the Muslim nations' uprisings against European colonialism. They love that along with Blade Runner and Star Wars. Because these people lack so much critical thinking, they don't actually realize when real woke politics is in their movies. They think left-wing politics is just, oh look, the cast is diverse, therefore left-wing agenda. So we're going to get into all of that today. So if you're watching the video and you like what you hear and see, please like the video, maybe comment your opinion as well. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Please consider supporting me on Patreon. I want to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible. The benefits of that at the moment are getting my Nintendo Switch friend code and getting access to the private patrons Discord server. Also follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. Come join our communities on my subreddit and my Discord, and check out my second channel, the Kavernacle Extra, where I archive all my live streams. So like I said, I'm very disappointed none of you told me about this video. It was uploaded on the 22nd of January 2022. Why have sales crashed for these top gaming franchises? And look who is in the thumbnail. They have Laura Bailey twice, once as Abby and once as the Russian sniper from the new Call of Duty Vanguard. But of course, this is clickbait. They don't actually talk about the new Call of Duty and Call of Duty Vanguard, nor do they talk about Laura Bailey's character in that game, because if they start talking about a Soviet woman sniper being put in a video game for diversity, they will quickly look pretty stupid, since there were loads of Soviet snipers who were women in the Second World War. So I've made some notes, we're going to go through it point by point. So let's start with the opening. First of all, he talks about like the origins, his awakening moment where he wants to get very political with Geeks and Gamers. That was when The Last Jedi came out.
I created Geeks and Gamers back in 2011, and it basically just started out as video game tournaments, local video game tournaments. Kind of evolved it a little more into more of a website, just talking about movies, video games. I was a big Star Wars fan. I was really excited when Disney purchased Lucasfilm. I regret saying that every day now at this point in time, but at the time I was very excited about it. We had a Facebook group, I had a website, and everything was really good. And then a movie called The Last Jedi came out and really just crashed all of my faith in Hollywood, and opened up a lot of people's eyes to the wokeness in Hollywood. So we kind of shifted Geeks and Gamers as to more calling out identity politics. And once The Last Jedi happened, it opened my eyes up to what was happening in the video game industry, what was happening in the movie industry, the comic industry. But I was running Geeks and Gamers at this particular point in time, and I was a Donald Trump voter, a very, very passionate Donald Trump voter, but I never made that public knowledge. That's where the big moment for Geeks and Gamers shifted, because once I said I'm publicly a Trump supporter, that just started I'm going to call everything out now, because now I am going to be called every name in the book. And that is where the jumping off point really happened for us. And it opens up so many things that we're going to talk about here today.
So I've made a whole video about how these types use The Last Jedi to get people involved in their political movement. The funny thing about this is, he actually said on video he liked The Last Jedi when he initially saw it.
I love The Last Jedi, and I think it did a damn good job for being what it needed to be for Star Wars.
So could it be he actually liked it and then saw loads of people hating it and switch his opinion? Don't we call faking opinions for money something? Oh yeah, totally a grifter. So I made a whole video about how The Last Jedi was used by these types, but basically what happened with The Last Jedi, as someone who doesn't care for it too much but doesn't think it's the worst film ever, it was a sort of like subversion of traditional Star Wars stuff. People didn't really like it, but a lot of people couldn't really understand why they didn't like it. So people like Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers came along and they're like, well, you don't like it because of diversity and left-wing politics, and Rian Johnson didn't actually want to create a good Star Wars movie or a good movie in general. He just wanted to push his political agenda, the political agenda of maybe including some diverse cast members. But these guys framed it as he wanted to promote like Rey over Luke. And it always amazes me these people get so mad about the new Star Wars movies. Like I said at the start, the new Star Wars movies have nothing to say essentially. What, like, bad is bad and good is good? Like, the only complex message was actually in The Last Jedi with the DJ character who sells to both sides, like making a point about like this war economy. But again, it's nothing special. These guys say this stuff while having posters of the original Star Wars films in the background, and the prequels as well, which actually have loads of politics from a left-leaning director, George Lucas. George Lucas told James Cameron that the rebels are inspired by the Viet Cong.
You did something very interesting with Star Wars, if you think about it. The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys Mujahideen.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly. So were you thinking of that at the time?
Yes.
So it was a very anti-authoritarian, very kind of 60s against the man kind of thing, nested deep inside of a fantasy.
Or a colonial, you know, we're fighting the largest empire in the world.
Right.
And it was the same thing with the Vietnamese.
Yep.
The irony of that one is in both of those, the little guys won.
Right.
And the big, highly technical empire,
the English Empire, right?
English Empire, the American Empire, lost.
Yeah.
That was the whole point.
George Lucas was a left-leaning young director who included stuff about Vietnam in American Graffiti, was meant to actually direct Apocalypse Now as well. And with the prequel films, he says Emperor Palpatine is inspired by Richard Nixon. So those films are all very, very political. It's not like even subtle. While the sequel films essentially have nothing to say, but it just shows their own bigotry, they're just outraged at a diverse cast. And I think it says a lot that they like The Rise of Skywalker more than The Last Jedi, despite The Rise of Skywalker being an absolute dumpster fire because it was trying to do like Reddit fan service, essentially appeal to like the lowest common denominator with the most cringe-worthy fan service you've ever seen in the film, to a massive detriment to the actual film's quality. I don't like the sequel films, but I'm not blaming diversity or politics for it, because if they actually had a political message, I think they'd be a lot better. So Jeremy also says he's like a passionate Trump supporter, and he felt like because everyone knew it, he could just be like emboldened to talk about this stuff. Now these guys are constantly stuck in the past, so they're using The Last of Us 2 as another example of woke politics ruining gaming. So they say that Last of Us essentially, that people love The Last of Us, they wanted to see the story continue, and actually The Last of Us 2 isn't a continuation of the story. They made it solely about identity politics.
You have The Last of Us, which is a very well-received video game that came out very late PlayStation 3, but really on PlayStation 4 continued to sell really well, and it's beloved by so many people. When you get announced a sequel that's coming, people expect certain things, especially when you advertise that it's another story between this father figure in Joel and his daughter Ellie. These characters that people had such love for, the relationship that they developed. Well, as it turns out, that's not exactly what Naughty Dog or Neil Druckmann, the director of the game, had in store. Instead, they were going to talk about identity politics. Instead, they were going to push things down your throat, whether it be about gender identity, whether it be about sexuality. And if you didn't like that, if you criticized that, you were just called a bigot.
So they go on to complain about the false advertising and how the original was a story about Joel and Ellie, and they wanted to see that story continue and develop even further. They pandered to identity politics and inserted identity politics where none existed before.
And the end of the game, he has to make a decision about whether to potentially save humanity or to save this innocent girl, and he saves this innocent girl. In the second game, what people are so attached to is that relationship between Joel and Ellie. So as we fast forward a few years for this sequel, all of the trailers, all of the discussion points, all of the things that are being pushed are about this relationship between Joel and Ellie. You're supposed to go on another adventure together somehow. We're not quite sure how. Well, a few months before this game actually comes out, it gets revealed that only an hour or two into this game, Joel, the main character in the first game, gets brutally by a woman named Abby, this character that was rejected by everybody, and then you have to play as her for half of the rest of the game. It's a story about two women, Ellie and Abby, and it's a story about revenge. They even replaced parts of these trailers where Joel was aged up to make it look like they were going on an adventure, to then turn it into a flashback. So they were deceptive, they lied to everybody because they knew damn well people wouldn't buy this game if it was a story about Abby and Ellie instead of Joel and Ellie.
So these guys are meant to be super fans of The Last of Us. They care about the first game so much that that's why they're disappointed about the second one. But they talk about identity politics and putting characters with like explicit, different sexualities in there. But the first game had a pretty prominent gay character in Bill. The DLC for the first game literally featured a gay relationship. I mean, if you really love The Last of Us, you have to at least acknowledge all that stuff was in there in the first place. But this just shows you like their grift. I'm pretty sure Jeremy hasn't even played it. The other guy might have played it, but again, they didn't take in the first game's message. As for the false advertising stuff, I believe this was done because they didn't want to spoil the game beforehand. There is another game that had a big twist where they did false advertising. It's called Metal Gear Solid 2, one of the most revolutionary games of all time, made by Hideo Kojima, and everyone just accepted it as him tricking people because that's what he likes to do. But when The Last of Us tries to subvert that, and it's clearly kind of inspired by Metal Gear Solid's own marketing campaign, apparently they're trying to trick people. I mean, you can view it in that way if you want. For me personally, I believe they're trying massively not to spoil anything. Now, like The Last Jedi, they believe that the left-wing politics is also getting you to play as Abby. Abby is the person who kills Joel in about the first 2 hours of the new game. So in their mind, you play as Abby and she kills Joel, and you play as Abby instead of Joel for identity politics, for left-wing politics. They don't want to make you play a good story. They just want to tell a story about two women, essentially. Now, this is a common complaint, like other chuds like Angry Joe got mad about. They're saying, well, The Last of Us is about Joel and Ellie, so the second one must be a continuation of their story. 2 points on that. Last of Us 2 is very much a continuation of Joel and Ellie's story, in that the whole game centers around Joel's actions in the first game, but Joel was actually very present. It's a game about how you deal with grief and how you channel your grief, and that's why Joel looms so large throughout the game, and he features in flashbacks. It's not like he isn't present. The whole story is about this cycle of revenge these two women are on, and they're both at different points in the cycle. Abby has had a revenge and is dealing with the consequences of her emotions after that revenge. Ellie is on the same journey Abby has been on and is pursuing the revenge. If these guys were in charge of all art, you would get stuff like The Rise of Skywalker constantly, because I love The Last of Us 2 because it played with my emotions in like an expert way, because it killed someone that I really liked from the first game, and I wasn't mad about that. I was happy they did it because I like games that take risks and do stuff differently, and then with that, knowing that my investment in Joel, they used it to make me go on this massive warpath as Ellie, destroy everyone in sight, only to flip it and show me the other perspective of the people she's been hurting, so I feel bad and see how destructive revenge can be and see everything from different sides. It's manipulating you on purpose to tell a good story. And also it shows that these guys just want to be pandered to. Neil Druckmann was involved with the creation of the first game. Like, he is responsible in many ways for these characters. He wrote and directed the second game. It's his story, it's his characters. You cannot like that all day. You cannot like that all day, but he doesn't have to pander to people who like the first one. For example, if I write a book and it becomes wildly successful, and then I have an idea for a second book and I start writing that, if I'm a good creative, I'm not thinking about, what do the fans of the last one want? Why would I think that? These games are art, they're creative vision. You don't take into account what randos on the internet might feel like. Notice how I said good, because The Rise of Skywalker did take that into account, and that movie is an absolute dumpster fire, literally the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. Because it pandered to people, and that's what these people want. It wants people to take all their little stupid criticisms and opinions to heart and try and make something that appeals to, like, these lore nerds on the internet. So you can hate The Last of Us all you want, you can hate Part 2 all you want, but to say that, like, thematically number 2 isn't consistent with the first one, that Part 2's representation isn't just building on the representation in the first one, is dishonest and shows that you're either an idiot and you didn't even realize the first one had, you know, diversity in it, or you're purposely pretending it didn't so you can frame the other one as something that wanted to prioritize diversity above all else, which I really don't think it even does. Like, it has this representation and there are subplots about this representation, but the overall story is not about this representation. So moving on, Jeremy then says that Trump, who got 75 million votes, says that everything woke turns to
is a wise man once said, a wise man that got 75 million votes just a few months ago said, everything woke turns to shit.
Everything woke turns to shit.
Everything that goes into this realm.
I mean, Jeremy, Trump did get 75 million votes, but he still lost and he's a loser. So you're telling me the opinion of someone who lost 2 elections based on the popular vote and conclusively lost the second one. But this notion of everything woke turns to, as Trump says and Jeremy says, is so ridiculous. But just before I go into that a bit more, they also say you can't make things woke from the ground up because no one will like them.
If something is full on woke, they're not going to put a lot of money behind it because they know it's going to fail. This is why they continue to try to hijack pre-existing properties, pre-existing characters, pre-existing IPs, because they know they cannot build anything that's woke from the ground up. They can't do it because there's nobody there that's just willing to support it. Getting into spaces that already exist and then demanding that you accept them, and then once you accept them, then they demand that you get out of their space suddenly.
So these two notions are so ridiculous, even based on the Daily Wire and Jeremy himself, because these guys actually like woke things. They don't actually realize it. So to them, left-leaning politics and woke things in media is just about diversity. Let me remind you, Ben Shapiro and Jeremy both really love the new Dune film, right? So let me just play you these guys fanboying about Dune.
This may be the best looking science fiction movie ever. And this movie is just spectacular looking. Like, from beginning to end, every shot is a piece of art. The color scheme is wonderful. Every shot is beautifully constructed. The special effects are great. I think the movie is actually great. I think it's going to be hard to adjudicate whether the movie is great actually until you get a second part, because you don't know what the conclusion of the movie looks like. It could be a complete disaster area, in which case the first half is great and the second half sucks. But if this completes in the way that the first half is done, I think it's going to be one of the great sci-fi epics of all time.
Obviously, there was some controversy about a year ago. I covered here on the channel about it potentially going woke. I'm here to tell you that I loved this movie. I was blown away by this movie. From the moment it begins until the moment it ended, I was completely immersed in this world. This guy is a fantastic director, and every single shot in this movie is meant to make you feel like you are part of something grand.
So if everything woke turns to shit, as they put it, why was the new Dune good? Why was it just nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars? I'm pretty sure Geeks and Gamers might come out and praise it. I would not be surprised if these anti-SJW nerd channels start using Dune's Oscar nomination to prove that people do not want woke anymore and they just want a good movie. But just like how Ben Shapiro loves Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 and loads of these nerds love Blade Runner, I'm convinced conservatives do not have critical thinking skills at all, especially when it comes to like movies and video games. Like I made whole videos about like Abby Shapiro and her husband saying that BioShock is pro-conservative, Red Dead Redemption 2 is pro-conservative, and with Dune specifically, the politics are so like explicit in Dune. Like the anti-colonial message in Dune is very on the nose, but these guys miss it because they see movies as the A to B plot. They see movies as the hero's journey. So they just watch Dune, see Paul Atreides' journey, and everything else is just like completely discounted. So the stuff about like the palm trees in like their estate, taking like, was it like 5 people's water rations a day to, you know, help one exist, that's not a message about colonialism and all like these colonialist gardens they often brought to really hot countries. The stuff about, you know, making Arrakis a paradise with water, which was put off because instead the colonialists wanted to mine spice, like that's not a woke message about colonialism. The whole thing about the Atreides family like being the good colonialists and the Fremen still hating them is obviously a message that like no matter who's in charge of Arrakis from outside, it is still colonialism. In the whole film, you're meant to side with the Fremen, who could be a stand-in for various Muslim revolutionary groups throughout the 1960s, or you could also see them as a stand-in for like the Palestinians if you wanted. I'm sure Ben Shapiro loves that message. Dune is also like anti-capitalist as well. Like Denis Villeneuve actually said that about the film, and these guys pretend it's not woke because these guys either, like I speculate, do not understand it, cannot critique a film properly or realize the themes of a film, or they actually might realize this, but because most nerds are too stupid to realize it themselves, they just pandered to them. The same way Jeremy said The Last Jedi was good and then said it was bad because he realized a lot of people hated it. I can imagine someone like him watching the film, maybe understanding the message, if I'm going to give him too much credit, and then realizing most of his audience actually really like it. So for him, for his grip, him saying it's a good movie is actually a good thing. So like I said, these people are stuck in like 2013, 2016, because they also bring out ANITA SARKEESIAN, like, she has not been relevant for like maybe 6 years and stuff.
Yeah, ANITA SARKEESIAN is someone who exists because of the activist in the games journalist world. This is one of the most unpopular people on the internet. I mean, she might get ratioed more than someone like Keith Olbermann does at this point. I mean, she is terribly unpopular.
This is somebody who 2 years before she started talking about video games is on camera saying that she doesn't play video games, that she doesn't like video games, that they're just not for her, until she decided to talk about tropes versus women in video games, and then realized that being a fake victim and being a grifter is far more profitable.
And a lot of these games journalist sites elevated ANITA SARKEESIAN and pretended that she was this voice of reason, and they tried to pretend that she was actually out there saying something that mattered.
I've made a whole video about how the reaction to her was totally overblown because in the context of like 2022, what she says in her video about like tropes and women in video games would be like a pretty standard breadtube essay today. I've watched them and they raise some interesting points I hadn't always thought about in terms of the history of female tropes in media, but there really wasn't anything significant in there to make me like reassess my whole worldview or tell me stuff I didn't actually know. Like, go check out my video. When you watch these videos in 2022, you just think it is absolutely bizarre this person became so hated by these types, literally just for explaining like historic bigotry against women, and these guys completely freaked out. And why are they still bringing it up? Like, she is not relevant. Who cares about her anymore? Her views and her followers are so low. These people's platforms are so much bigger, and they still pretend she has like a massive hold on the industry. So the closing point of the video actually makes me laugh a bit, and it probably explains why they actually are featuring on the Daily Wire's channel. These guys are whining about conservatives who hate gamers, and they're also whining about like the left wing, like AOC, actually, you know, liking gamers, being gamers, and going on Twitch streams like Hassan Pikers.
And I think that a big part of that is for mainstream people on the right, mainstream Republicans, mainstream conservatives, whatever you want to call it, maybe stop consistently bashing video game culture. That's a popular thing to do. Even people like Josh Hawley did it just not too long ago. I like a lot of what Josh Hawley stands for. But when you do that and you say, oh, well, that's just not worth your while. Video games, you shouldn't bother with that, blah, blah, blah. That would help a lot in this fight, I think, if more mainstream Republicans, you don't even have to necessarily support everything, but if you see this, if you see people complaining about a real problem that you have in the gaming industry, maybe give that a signal boost, maybe look into it, because a lot of our values can align on those things.
A lot of conservatives tend to disrespect gaming and gaming culture, and I don't think that's helpful. When you have someone that is objectively dumb as AOC, very popular on Twitch streams because they're embracing a lot of these Twitch streamers, but all they want is the clout. All they see is AOC on my channel. They want to take pictures and everything like that. And yeah, that's cringe in itself. It's absolutely cringe. But you're talking about Twitch streamers that have hundreds of thousands of and maybe millions of followers, and they're sitting there bringing someone like an AOC on their channel. All that's doing is showing young kids like, oh, AOC is one of the cool ones. I'm going to pay attention to what her politics are. That is where a lot of the culture is being lost right now.
So that is just like really, really funny. These conservative gamers whining that conservative politicians don't actually like them. Because it's the conservative politicians who were leading the war against video games in the early 2000s. So that is the Daily Wire Geeks and Gamers collab. And like I said, I feel like this exists because the Daily Wire want to extend their ridiculous culture war into video games a bit more. It seems like Ben Shapiro doesn't really play video games. We saw it with Abby Shapiro and her husband, who's a lawyer at the Young America Foundation or whatever it's called. Like, they're trying to get into video games. The problem being the best video games are woke, and a lot of people know it. Like, you can talk about The Last of Us being ruined by wokeism. The Last of Us is like a very, very successful game, but some of the most beloved franchises in the entire world are actually like explicitly left-leaning. Metal Gear Solid, anyone? One of the oldest franchises, explicitly left-leaning. Death Stranding is, of course, Kojima's newest game, very left-leaning, said it's a response to Trump and Brexit. Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy VII the original, many of the Final Fantasy games explicitly left-wing. Even Ubisoft games from that awful company, Watch Dogs Legion, is probably one of the most left-wing games I've played. Probably I caught onto it a lot more than others because I'm from the UK and I'm really into my British politics and everything. But also they said in the video that like no one can start something that's explicitly woke because no one will like it. Jeremy and Ryan, may I present to you Disco Elysium, a wildly successful RPG that came out a couple years ago. And here's a fun headline. Disco Elysium developers shout out Marx and Engels in Game Awards victory speech. In the acceptance speech for the Fresh Indie Game Award, Helen Hendypair said that the team would like to thank some of the great people that came before us. The people they shouted out, including the architects of communist thought, Marx and Engels. If you play Disco Elysium, which features the vocal talents of members of the socialist podcast Chapo Trap House, you may not be surprised by this reference. So yes, there are lots of woke things. You can even be an explicit communist now. Shout out Marx and Engels in your acceptance speech for awards, and gamers will love your video games. Like, the most conservative video games I can think of, like explicitly conservative, is probably like some of the early Call of Duty games. Call of Duty Black Ops 1 and 2, which are essentially CIA propaganda. Modern Warfare 1, which is neocon propaganda. Some of the other ones, which are very militarized. Call of Duty isn't all bad. I've made videos about most of them. Vanguard was pretty cool for its politics. Check out my video on that as well. So that is it for their video on the Daily Wire. I will just say it will never stop being like so ironic that the people who moan about the politicization of media are literally like massive conservative culture war warriors who insert their own right-wing politics into everything and rail against stuff that is fairly like innocuous in terms of its politics, while completely ignoring the very explicit woke politics of some of their favorite movie franchises. Again, playing into my belief that most conservatives do not have any critical thinking skills, and I'd have a lot more respect for them if they're like, yeah, like Dune's politics are influenced by this history and this political message. I don't really agree with that, and maybe I don't agree with that, but I like the movie. I don't understand why they can't come out and say it. Like, I always say to people, I like the original Top Gun movie. It literally is just like American propaganda, which massively increased recruitment for the Navy and actually had input from the US military. You can like stuff that is trashy. You can like stuff that doesn't agree with your politics. I like the original Black Ops game, despite it being CIA propaganda. Sometimes stuff is just fun despite the politics, and you guys can admit that, despite complaining that everything has gone woke just because there's diversity. Anyway, that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. Please consider becoming a patron, join our communities on my Discord and my subreddit, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.